Welcome to the Public Health Practice Gap, where public health meets real-world systems, organizational strategy, and the harsh reality of implementation. I am your host, Dr. Fevrier, founder of NextGen Public Health Consultancy. Each week, this podcast explores a central problem, not whether we know what works, but why what works so often fails when it reaches real-world systems. Because the gap between evidence and execution is where most public health efforts break down. And that gap is what I call public health practice gap. Over the past several episodes, we have been building something very intentional. We started with a simple question, that is social media just a tool or is it a system? Then we moved deeper. Why isn't the system being governed? What does the science actually say? Why does awareness fall short? And what would system design actually look like? Today, we ask a different question, and it is the one that matters most. What happens if we get this wrong? We are living through a moment that has no historical precedent. I want you to really hear that. For the first time in human history, a generation is being raised inside an environment that is continuous, algorithmically curated, and behaviorally engineered. This is not exposure, this is immersion. Think about that difference. Previous generations consumed media. You sat down, you watched television, you turned it off, and you walked away. The media was an object in your environment. This generation lives inside the media. From early adolescence, young people are receiving feedback through platforms. They are comparing themselves constantly. They are learning social norms digitally. They are experiencing attention not as a sustained focus, but as something fundamentally fragmented. This is not just behavior change. This is environmental change. We have placed our youth inside a new architecture, and we are expecting them to navigate it with brains that evolve for a completely different world. Public health has always dealt with environments. That is the core of our discipline. But historically, those environments were visible. Think about air quality. Think about water safety. Think about urban design and sanitation. You could measure them. You could physically regulate them. You could walk into a factory and change the machinery. Digital environments are entirely different. They are invisible. They are adaptive. They are personalized. And they are constant. Two 14-year-olds can sit side by side on the exact same couch, open the exact same app, and inhabit completely different realities. Their feeds are uniquely engineered to their specific psychological vulnerabilities. That has never existed before. How do you regulate an environment that changes its shape every time you scroll? How do you build a public health intervention for an architecture you cannot even see? Now let's talk about development. Adolescence is a critical, fragile window. It is the exact moment in human development when identity forms. It is when social comparison dramatically increases. It is when emotional regulation is actively developing and when attention stabilizes. Now, I want you to overlay that biological reality with a digital system that provides constant comparison, algorithmic reinforcement, continuous stimulation, and public feedback loops. What happens when you mix a brain desperate for social validation with a machine designed to quantify it? We don't fully know the end of this story yet, but we are beginning to see the signals. And those signals are pointing toward a profound disruption in how an entire generation regulates its own mind. Let's ground this. Let's step away from the theory and imagine a 14-year-old today. They wake up and the very first thing they do is to check their phones. Notifications, messages, social feeds. The dopamine loop begins before their feet hit the floor. Throughout the day, they check it intermittently. Between classes, during downtime, even while interacting with the friends in person. At night, the scrolling continues. The comparison continues. The feedback continues into the late hours, bleeding into the sleep cycle. Now multiply that single day by 365 days. Multiply it by multiple years. Multiply it across the most critical developmental windows of their lives. That is not occasional influence. That is environmental shaping. This is an architecture constantly molding their neurology. In public health, we understand the power of accumulation. Small effects repeated constantly over time becomes massive outcomes. This is why seatbelts matter. It is why daily nutrition matters. It is why sleep matters. When researchers debate the impact of digital media, you will often hear critics say, well, the effect size in the studies is small. But public health professionals know the truth. Small effects applied across a massive population, repeated every single day, produce a crisis. Digital exposure matters. Even if the effect seems small in a single afternoon, at scale, across millions of developing brains, it becomes significant. Now, we have to talk about incentives, because this system did not happen by accident. This system is not neutral. It is driven by a very specific economy, the attention economy. These platforms are locked in a ruthless competition for three things: time, engagement, and retention, which means they are constantly, relentlessly optimizing. And here is the hard truth. They are not optimizing for well-being. They are optimizing for engagement. That creates an unavoidable tension. The goals of the platform are fundamentally at odds with the developmental needs of the child. The system is working exactly as it was designed to work. It is just that its design is actively hostile to human health. Let's look at the mismatch. What does adolescent development actually require? It requires unstructured time. It requires physical, in-person interaction. It requires cognitive rest. It requires private spaces for identity exploration, where mistakes aren't permanent. What does the digital system provide? Continuous stimulation, constant quantified feedback, fragmented attention, persistent, inescapable comparison. There is a profound mismatch between what the human brain needs to thrive and what the digital environment demands. And in public health, we know that mismatches create outcomes. The outcome we are seeing in a generation in distress. So what happens if we get this wrong? What happens if we just keep debating the data and do nothing? If we do nothing, the system doesn't pause. It evolves. It becomes more immersive. It becomes more personalized. It becomes more effective at capturing and holding attention. Think about spatial computing. Think about AI-generated feeds. And the generation growing up within it, they will adapt. But they won't adapt to reality. They will adapt to the system. We will have a generation wired for a digital environment, but fundamentally unequipped for the physical and emotional realities of the human experience. Let's bring it all back to the core of this show. We understand the system. We understand the risk. We understand the patterns. We have the data. We have the hearings. We have the Surgeon General warnings. But we have not redesigned the environment. We are still telling parents to just limit screen time. We are treating a systemic architectural problem with individualized behavioral band-aids. That is the gap. The space between knowing the environment is harmful and actually doing the hard structural work of changing it. I want to leave you with the most important idea from today's episode. We are not just observing a public health issue. We are currently shaping the developmental environment of an entire generation. And the decisions we make right now, the policies we enact, the systems we build, the boundaries we enforce, will determine the outcomes we see for decades to come. We cannot afford to get this wrong. If this episode resonated with you, I highly encourage you to read this week's edition of the Next Gen Public Health Brief. You can find it along with our other resources at nextgenpublichealthconsultancy.com. If you are a leader, an executive, or an organization trying to understand how modern systems shape long-term health outcomes, this is exactly the work I focus on through Next Gen Public Health Consultancy. Reach out. Let us build better systems. If you found this conversation valuable today, share it. Send it to a colleague, a policymaker, or a parent. Because the more people who truly understand the system, the more likely we are to change it. New episodes of the Public Health Practice Gap is released every Tuesday. I am Dr. Bradley Fevrier, and this has been the Public Health Practice